Hi guys and welcome to MotorScotti. Well, I've came to the conclusion that with project cars, they're never really finished. And with that I mean that I really never finished. Even though a while ago I posted my final upgrades on this, and then I came back with a few videos on the car with the indicator spring and whatnot. I've just been in the process of replacing the springs, something I wanted to do back in the days when I actually restored the car. Back then I decided it wasn't necessary. Now I'm gonna get it done. I've already replaced the rear springs. I'm not gonna go through the process of showing it again because I've already done that in a previous video. Link in the description to that video. As you can see here, just peeking in, new springs are in, and the old springs are in here. I just went with the stock springs. I have no interest in putting in lowering springs or anything like this. And the old ones are probably still good, but you don't know. You never know. I have the front one here, which obviously I'm going to need the spring compressor for the front ones and new rubbers that come in separately. Obviously, like always, I have all the part number in the description of the video. So check out the description for the parts number, which now brings me to the actual point of this video. I took the occasion to go through the car and see if everything was still okay, and obviously I noticed a few things that need to be replaced that I had already anticipated a couple of months ago, and actually ordered parts over the winter so I could have them ready when it was time to get them changed. And let me go through it and show you. First of all, I'm going to change the water pump because there's a small little leak. I can see it sweating here at the mounting points here on the left side on top, and also down below on the driver's side here. I got a new one here ready to be mounted. Well, actually not ready. I'm gonna, because it's nice and shiny, I'm just gonna clean it, degrease it, and paint it with some clear coats so it will stay like this and not get this rusty coating, which is the only real spot in here that really doesn't look nice. Then there's something else I noticed. I noticed this a while ago. Obviously the power steering pump is slightly leaking, and it's really just down at where the pump meets the housing, where the seal is. There's, I mean, it works fine, but it's just leaking a bit. So I get a new one of these. I don't know if it's remanufactured, I don't remember, or if it's a new one. Apparently they don't make them new ones, so all of them are remanufactured. I could have gotten also either one with the housing already installed, ready to go, or just a rebuild kit with all the O-rings and springs and rubbers, but I didn't want to go through that myself. Just decided to go with this pump assembly alone, take the old one out, take the pump out of the old housing and replace it with this new pump. Fill it back up with oil and bleed the system. Then another thing I wanted to go through, since I am replacing the front springs also, I'm gonna change the motor mounts. It's not something I'm really looking forward to, but in order to access the motor mount bolts, these are mounted on the cross member, obviously on these lower section, and then the engine is attached to with a bolt to the rubber section here, and I am hoping to remove the remaining bits of vibration, especially if I drive on the motorway, freeway, highway speeds, 100 kilometers an hour upwards, and there's occasionally some bad vibration. So as I've already made the experience of changing all the control arm bushings, even though sometimes when they look nice, they're really old and hard, and changing those made a huge difference in the ride comfort. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the motor mounts and also the transmission mount. This is the new one with new rubber. And then also here on the bench I have a spark controller, a new one that goes in here. It goes in here behind this module there. There's nothing wrong with this one, but since last year I bought a few modules, like the idle air control module. Anyhow, a bunch of parts, modules, electronics, and I got this one as well, just to make sure, just to have it, and to make sure everything is new. So I will replace that in the process also. But for now, I'm going to start with the transmission mount. you can see that my car is already on jack stands, since I have already replaced the rear springs. It's gonna be staying like this for a while. So let's go under the car and remove the old transmission mount and replace it with this new one. Here's what we're dealing with. I supported the transmission with the jack and a wooden block just so it wouldn't fall down on me. Once I removed the transmission support brace here, which are 50mm bolts, and then the ones here of the actual mount, I needed to use a breaker bar to loosen them up. These are 30mm. This one came off quite easily with the breaker bar, and this one is still being stuck. So I don't want to round the nut, so I just put some penetrating oil on it. Gotta wait a few minutes and then try it again. Alright, I've actually run into a little bit of a problem here. Haven't been able to remove the second bolt of the old transmission mount, and because, well, it's a hex 30mm, I'm using this star-shaped 30mm. I'm running the risk of stripping the nut or the bolt, and I don't want to do this, and I only have this what is this, the small hex 30mm nut, and I don't have as much leverage on this one, as much stability as I have on the big breaker bar. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to the shop and get me a hexagonal 13mm nut. Anyhow, I have plenty more to do that I can do in the meantime. I have removed the front wheels. With that, I'm gonna have to obviously take the spring compressor and remove the front springs and loosen the shock absorber upper bolts so I can bring everything down. Also have a new set of steering rack. So I think for now I'm just gonna go with that. Assemble everything with the new steering rack, which is here. Put it all together, then remove the old one and set up the new one at the exact same dimension or the same setting, so I can mount that. But I'm going to keep it on standby for the moment, because it will just give me, having it removed will just give me more space here for the rest I have to do in here, meaning when I'm going to access the motor mounts, and also when I'm going to access the power steering pump here. Boy, am I in luck. I actually went through all the sockets I had, and I realized I had a spark plug socket, a 13mm hex. I used that on my breaker bar and it came right loose. So here's the old one. So when you install this flat surface where the metal part comes way up like this, needs to face the front. So there's the new one. And we compare these. Goes in here. We compare old and new. You can see it's slightly different. Obviously, this is quite worn now. A bit more. And there's just a hole, and in the new one you can adjust it a little bit, which is fine. That is the nut that's holding the that's connecting it to the brace. You can clearly see this is just worn, and this has a little bit give if you push it with your finger, your thumb. This is completely solid and pressed in. All I have to do now is put this back in order and reattach everything. One thing I do want to address here is that because the rubber is new and thicker. It's difficult to line up the sprays just in one go because it's gonna stick out. So what I'm gonna do now is to take another jack and to actually push up here the center point so I can line up both sides properly and bolt them down straight, and hopefully that will do the trick. Just put some pressure on this transmission mount so it can fold a bit. So here's what I meant. I took this jack to lift up the center area of the brace the transmission mount is, so I could properly bolt down the brace from on both sides. And now that it is done, I can just release the pressure of the center. Move the jack. Also make sure that I tighten down that center bolt where the brace is connected to the transmission mount, and then I'm done here. That's it. All's tight. Good to go. Now that was pretty straightforward. So out with the old, in with the new. Put this into the bin of old parts. Well, I'm glad that's all done. Now we can move on. Well, where should we move on to? Should I take care of the oil leak here? That's originating somewhere here from the engine, top of the engine, or the steering rack, I think. I'm gonna disassemble the steering rack here and just put it next to the new assembly here. This is Mevotech. All the part numbers are in the description, except for the idler arm. That's an ACDelco. I wanted to go with ACDelco because ACDelco is OEM, but they don't have all of these components, at least not from Rock Auto, where I usually order the parts. There was Moog also, but I've heard very mixed reviews of Moog. I don't know, maybe they might be very good. I don't know about Mevotech. I'm not sure if they're good or bad quality. Well, here I am. I have them, and I'd rather just get the whole line from the same brand so that I know that it fits. So next step now is to remove all the steering rack linkage here, put it next to that one so I can adjust here the length. We proper have this adjust the sleeves, measure the distances of each part here. All these plastic bags are with the grease fittings and cotter pins that will go in at the end. But let's do that first. So just as a recall, these here are 19 millimeters on both sides, obviously the same, and then over where the idler arm is, bolts that attach the idler arm to the chassis here are both 18 millimeters. And from underneath here you can see these are the two bolts, the two nuts. I just sprayed some WD-40 on them to make it easier to remove them. Also, what you should know is that you can put your wrench here, and then from the other side here and behind the plastic cover here you have this axis. Here you see the two bolts. We can go in with your socket and your ratchet and hold it and disassemble it from here. I hope you can see this. Now I have my old steering rack here. The idler arm, actually, before I removed that, I attached it with some with a zip tie actually to the frame. So when I would loosen the bolts and pull them out, the whole thing wouldn't just fall on my face. And then afterwards I released the driver's side, and then I could just go under the car and snip off the zip tie and take the whole thing out. Now what I have to do is I have here my new steering rack set up. I'm gonna somewhat put it together, or also, like, I mean, you have to buy obviously all the different components separately. I have put the links to all the parts in the description. Now I'm just gonna tie down the center link using a 16mm socket. And you can clearly see here that the bolt is actually turning with the nut. So when I use an Allen key to insert an Allen key here to tighten it down. So now I'm just going to do the other side. I've got the Allen key armed with a 60mm wrench and a 5mm Allen key, which I insert in the middle. I can tighten this down. But to be honest, I don't want to tighten it down too much right now. I just want to have it snug. I can tighten it down closer, well, properly when it's in the car. Now, what you have to do is to measure the distances between the tie rods, the inner one and the outer one, towards the connecting sleeve here. Let's bring it down here so you can see it properly. Alright, as I said, now I'm going to measure the distance from the center point here of the inner tie rod to the end here of the connecting sleeve, which is 16.5 centimeters. 16.5 centimeters. So I want to have this set up right on the money. That's where I'm going to leave it, and that's where I'm going to attach the sleeves here. I'm going to bolt them down. And you can see here on the outside that there's a little notch here, so you can basically just move them over up to this notch and bolt them down there. Alright, for now I'm going to leave this be. This is all pre-assembled. I have mounted this on off camera. Mounted the idler on as well, the new one. This is an ACDelco product, and mounted this on with the cotter pinion already. And the grease nipples on all the other elements will go in at the very end when it's installed, and align everything with the adjusting sleeve. For now I'm just going to leave it as is here, out of the way, so I have space underneath the car to tackle all the rest. Now what I'm going to do is take off the air cleaner assembly here and get behind the engine, or at the very back of the engine, and see where the oil leak is coming from. Probably from the distributor, but let's go ahead and have a look. In order to see or to find the source of the oil leak, I'm going to remove the distributor cap and a few things. I'm going to unplug whatever needs to be unplugged. Probably a good point to also disconnect the battery at this stage. You're joining me here from underneath the car, and this is where I saw the issue to begin with. I actually saw this right in the beginning when I bought the car. I did my first oil change. I just cleaned this up and thought the issue was the valve covers. But as you can see the blue outline of the new valve cover seal when I repainted the valve covers. And this is not the issue of the oil leak. Take a look at this. If I zoom in here, well, zoom in, if I go in here and try to get to the bottom, get you in there inverted. My guess is it's that bolt that it's not even the intake, it's just that bolt here where it's leaking from, because if I look from underneath the car, it's only pouring down on the left side, on the driver's side, and not on the passenger side. Once again, you can see here from up top, trying to zoom in, there it is. I will try and remove and then put some Teflon sealant paper or band on it and put it back in. Well, it's proven to be a little bit harder than I expected. Sometimes it looks more difficult than it is, and sometimes it looks easier than it is. The point being here that in order for me to remove that screw, I really need to get a square bit that I can put on my ratchet. And I've tried with the wrench. There's really enough space to get enough leverage. Because it's hitting the firewall quite quickly, or then I tried to put a vice grip on, but the vice grip is too big, too thick, so I don't really have any good grip or no space to maneuver the vice grip around. So I went back to the shop and bought this. This is a square bit. I hope this will work, because these usually are used to bleed house radiators or open fuse boxes for houses. You know, everywhere they use this square bits. At least that's how we have it in Europe. Let's see if I can apply this actually for the car. Look at this, guys. I had the bolt covered in WD-40 for about 10 minutes and tried again to release it. And I had a wrench on top of this and another stick, so I would have some leverage. Actually the ratchet extension of the 1/2-inch ratchet. And it pretty soon just snapped. So luckily not the bolt inside the engine block snapped, but the tool. So I don't know what to do now. Well, I think I'm just going to clean it up and put some RTV around the bolt and hope that that will fix the leak. That's at least what I'm going to do in the meantime. If it continues to leak, I'm going to have to investigate again. So as you can see, I basically drowned the area in RTV, made sure it was clean before, and went all over the place. I mean, if I have to go back in there and do it, I can easily just push it away or cut off the top. This just comes, once it's dry, it's basically coming off as one piece. So I hope this cheap rednecky fix will actually fix it. I'm just gonna clean off this hose here, clean everything, put it back together. That's back in place. I mean, it's just a distributor cap, but what a pain sometimes to align this so these two bolts actually thread in where they have to be, where they're supposed to. Now guys, the time has come to get serious about these springs and the motor mounts. And for that, before I tackle this, I'm first going to spray some WD-40 on all the bolts that have to come loose. So the motor mount bolts, struts. I don't really need to put any WD-40 on those are quite new. I'll also not really show in detail how to do that because I've already done that, and the link to this video is in the description, as well as hopefully here somewhere in a card. did take me 2 starts to get it right. I'm actually going to mark this then on the new ones, so I get in at the right point, and also on the second one on the passenger side. What I'm really looking for is to installing new rubber here on top. These are really worn. I mean, obviously they still did the job, but I actually held them in place with some tape here when I put them in last time.
Now here's a warning message for you guys. Should you ever get as impatient as I was to compress and release the coil spring with the spring compressor, don't use an impact gun to do that. And here's why. As you could see, I got lucky, I didn't get hurt. But let this be a lesson for yourself. Be smart and do it the right way. Anyhow, let's move on to the spark controller.
Here I've just removed the spark control module. It's in behind this relay here. So remove those 2 7mm screws first, and then you can access this one, which is held on with another 2 7mm screws. So this works perfectly fine, and I will keep this in storage. But since I bought the new one, might as well just go and put some contact spray on the receiving end and put that one in. And also I noticed that the old one is noticeably heavier than the new one, even though it looks exactly the same. Feels like this one is empty and that one's full with stuff that needs to do important things. Anyhow, out with the old, in with the new. And again, you'll find the parts number here, also in the description.
Time to move on to the motor mounts.
Okay guys, so let me get you set up here. Obviously I've lowered the suspension. I put the disc here on a block of wood. The point here is to get the right angle. Obviously you could also just remove the A-arm, but you would have to remove a whole more thing here around. Take the sway bar off, and also make sure that the brake line doesn't snap. I'd remove it, but then you would have to bleed the whole system again. So I'm just letting it down far enough so I get a good angle here between the A-arm and the K-member, the cross member, so I can put my 1/2-inch socket wrench through. So you need 2 swivels, and a what's this, a 50 millimeter for the bolts that hold the motor mount to the cross member. I am using this motorcycle jack here to support the engine. I have it placed just under the oil pan here in the back, so that I also, when I remove one motor mount, I'm just going to remove one at a time. So this is the driver's side motor mount. We can see the bolts here, one here on the bottom. I've already loosened them a bit, 50 millimeter on either side. And on the top side, let me see if I can get the camera over here. There isn't that much space. You can see here the ratchet is already on one of the bolts. The 2-1 here. And from the inside, here we have the control arm. You have to reach in between. This is the lower bolt of the motor mount, and then for the other 2, the top one, this is where the spring would go through. Obviously that's out, and you have to guide your ratchet in here. You can see the 2 bolts here and here. They've already loosened a bit, and it really changes everything if you take your time, put some WD-40, some penetrating oil on those bolts and nuts. Let it sit for a day and then remove that. I haven't tried before, I haven't tried immediately after I put it on, but given that these have been in there for, well, 31 years now, it's cramped enough to get in there and loosen them. And if you're doing this at home on the floor, so might as well take one extra day, let the WD-40 sink in, and make the whole process easier to remove them. You don't strip the bolts and anything like that. And here, obviously, you guide the ratchet with your swivel here in between the control arm and the K-member, where my hand goes in. But you can use one hand to go through, if the spring's out, to go through in here, guide your ratchet, your socket. Anyway, you can guide it through, hold it on, and then have your ratchet, not your ratchet, your wrench on the other side. And then here, obviously, these are the bolts that hold the engine block to the motor mount. These are, I believe, 16 on the bolt and 18 on the nut on the opposite end. Now here's an interesting constellation. I have removed all the bolts, the 3 bolts that hold the motor mount to the K-member, and the 1 bolt that holds the motor mount to the engine block. And they came out with ease. Once I had some penetrating all on them, this is the new motor mount. So just so I remember how to put it, this is the new motor mount for the driver's side. And the way I'm gonna have to install it here onto the cross member is with the lower bolt here down there, where there's this little indentation. You can see all the other ends are pointy, just rounded off here. There's just one end that is straight cut here, and this is the end where the bolt goes in. This one stays empty. Let me just show you. Just make sure to take note of that before you take the old motor mount out, and don't remember how to put it in. The whole engine is still supported by this mount here, this stand, and obviously on the passenger side all the bolts are still in, so there's no risk of the whole thing to fall down. The bolts came out easily without any friction, interestingly enough. But in order, I can't just push it out because the rubber bits are holding on either side. And even if I were to cut these to push it out, I'd still have to put the new ones in, which does have these rubber tabs as well. So you can see them here. And given that I'm not going to cut those, especially not on the new motor mount, I probably have to lift the engine a little bit higher. Which also means that I'm probably going to have to remove the passenger side bolts first before I can properly lift the engine, take both out and put the new ones in. Now, these are still the new motor mounts. I've just released all the bolts. As you could see, I've put this motorcycle stand with a wooden block wrapped in a piece of cloth under the oil pan. I have released the transmission mount bolt, like it's just loosely on there. Obviously, if I want to lift the engine and the engine is still attached to the transmission, this needs to be free and be able to lift. And then the motor mounts are completely loosened up. The through bolt is off, as well as all the bolts that attach the motor mount to the K-member on either side. So I've already started to lift the motorcycle stand, to lift the engine, so that I can actually remove the motor mounts and put the new ones in. That's one out. See, now that one is out, I just want to take the moment to compare. Obviously, the most important thing is here the rubber insert. Of course it's somewhat hard, but it's still, like, I can feel how it's slightly pliable when I press it together with my 2 fingers. And here, it's just old and hard, and you can see how it's kind of compressed here in the bottom. And this is obviously brand new. The rest appears to be fairly the same. These are ACDelco parts, even though they are made in China. Here we go, the first one is in, it's bolted down, and since, I mean, there's not really any play with it, there's just like a straight hole through on either side, so it's not like you can adjust them, so I just bolted them right down. And obviously here you can see, I didn't mention this before, but it really helps that I remove the steering rack. I mean, I don't know how, well, obviously the spring, but also the whole steering elements here. Otherwise, I don't know how I would be able to access through all of these parts. That's all in, tightened down. So I'm just gonna have to lift the engine a little bit more to get the passenger side motor mount out, the old one. Naturally, when you're lifting the engine, also make sure that you don't lift it too high so you don't hit the distributor against the firewall, or when you start before, or make sure that there's not too much tension, well, there's not, too much tension anywhere. So you can actually just smoothly lift all the components without damaging anything. That's it, out. Guys, look at this. I am so happy that the new motor mounts are in. Finally, everything is in. Everything is tightened down. Good to go. I've lowered the oil pan. I've removed this motorcycle stand that I had to lift the engine here at the oil pan. The dent that is in here that was already there. I'm going to try later on to pull this down a little bit with the glue puller. But for now, I'm really happy. I'm really happy that this went in. And once again, I have to say, in order to make that happen the way that I did, I really suggest you remove all the steering linkage and of course the spring, so you can reach through all the different areas from underneath if you're doing this on the floor. And if the engine stays in, I'm afraid that's the only way that I would recommend to do it, because you just, there's already not much access, and this is the way to go about it. And then here the old engine mounts once again. Out with the old, in with the new, as they say. Again, like, this is one major thing that's finally done. I hope that will cancel the vibration on freeway speeds, motorway speeds. We'll see, we shall find out. So now, next step is to put the steering linkage in, put this back in the car, and also put the springs back in. I think I'm going to put the springs back in first, the new springs. Put those in, then the steering linkage. Alright guys, I've taken the liberty of putting the springs and everything back together without filming again, because I have done that already in episode 11. Link to that in the description, and maybe also here somewhere in the card. With the springs, just one thing I wanted to mention. Let me just give you an example here with the old ones. It can be a bit tricky, because if you have this old one and you want to compress it, in order to fit in here, the only style of spring compressor that I know that I can see fitting in there is the one that I have or this type of spring compressor with this fork. This is the bottom, here at the top with this insulator. Got new ones as well, which I attached with some tape, because it is so tricky to get in there and then compress this in a way that you need to have it indexed. So this bottom bit, end or start, needs to cover one of the holes that are on the bottom on the control arm. It needs to cover either the first or the second one. So I have it indexed in a way that it's covering the first on either side, and then all of this needs to compress to about 30 centimeters. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in inches. Now this whole thing is about 41, 42. So it needs to compress down to about here. All of this. I mean, and you can really compress these. If the compressor sits properly, you can really go down and compress these. But still, I mean, for the driver's side, again, even though I've done this before with the old ones a couple of years ago, that went fine. And with the passenger side, it was just an absolute pain. I don't know, man, because you have to align. I mean, as I said, you index the bottom, and then you have to make sure that these insulators stay on top, go in, and then the control arm is obviously tilted. Strut tower is flat, and then on the bottom, when the A arm is down, you need to make sure that you can index it here in the back, and that everything aligns, and then it aligns on the bottom, but it's tilted on top in the strut tower, so that's not really sitting pretty as it should. And then also this whole thing with the brake line. If the brake line is already on, you need to make sure that you don't have the whole thing to come down too far, so that you actually put wear on or pull on these brake line and brake hose. So what I did is I released this bracket so there was a little bit more give, and made sure I used bungee cords also to attach it here. But then at the same time, you want for the whole thing to come as far down as possible, so that you have the easiest access, the easiest way in for the spring. Anyhow, it's in there, and I hope I'll never ever ever have to take this apart, because the springs and the ball joints here are the parts that I really dislike the most exchanging on this. Like the ball joints, that was so hard to remove, or should I say to put the new ones in. I'll link in the description to that video as well. I think it's the same episode 11 where I take care of the suspension and some of the spring components. That's why here then I took the liberty of putting the new steering linkage in here as well. As you can see, everything is back inside, mounted. So I just want to make a few points here which will hopefully make it easier for you to do the same job. Obviously I pre-assembled the whole steering rack and set it already at the approximate distance that the old ones. Anyhow, I put this in, and also here the idler arm was in. So I started with the idler arm. I put those bolts in on top, the two ones, and then I used the jack to lift up the whole system so it wouldn't just hold up on the idler arm. And then that side. And then you want to have these adjustment sleeves not too tight, because you need to have a bit of give to the outer tie rod to the spindle at the right angle. So this here shouldn't be tied down yet. Should just hold. You can put it in, and then obviously I tied everything down. And these brackets, I just had it in a setup at a slight angle, so I could from either side just take a ratchet and if possible not hit on the control arm. And here, why do I have this magnet here, or this level with the magnet? I wanted to make sure that the whole steering rack here was at the correct angle, because there's one way you can adjust the height of this, the angle. Not here, obviously, since I didn't remove anything here with the steering box, I didn't have to worry about that. You can see here that you can adjust the level here of this arm. So I just put it in approximately, and then that's why I used this level with the magnet. So I could just put it on the carb to see if the carb was level. You can see it's not exactly level, so I tested it on several different elements here under the radiator. Here I have my steering brace, so you can see it's slightly leaning to the left, which was a gauge for me because I didn't want to. There was no point in having this completely level if the carb wasn't level itself. So I had to make sure that I could see at what level the carb was, so that I could set this up at the same angle. Anyhow, that's done. Eventually, I might have to do an alignment, because chances are it's not properly aligned. It's just at the same level the old system was. But let's see. And then also put on all the install the grease nipples. With the grease nipples, just don't over tighten them. Just set them in hand tight and a little bit more, because I've stripped one of these before, and you really don't want to do that, because then you have to, you have to get a new one. You have to drill the thread out, and it's just unneeded work. So that's that for steering. Now I have the power steering pump to replace and the water pump. I think I'm going to start with the water pump. And because I've flushed the system several times already over the last couple of years, I am trying to reuse the water. I'm just going to pump it out, drain the radiator through pumping everything out, pump as much water out as possible so I don't make a big mess. And basically the water pump is held in place through 4 screws. There's a gasket in behind. Here's a new gasket. And I've already painted this with clear coat. So let's go ahead and do it. Alright, I got everything cleaned up. I think now it's pretty clean. Let me get you in there. What do you think? Scraped it all off. Either take a razor blade or a very small sharp knife. Obviously here there's a little bit of surface rust here on the timing cover, but I just cleaned it. I'm not gonna paint it or anything, because also here the harmonic balancer and the pulley here are in its way to take it off, and I'm not gonna go ahead with that. I'm just gonna leave this a little bit of patina. Alright guys, here we have the old water pump, the pulley on. I purposely loosened up these 4 bolts of the pulley while the whole thing was still on the car with the belt on, so there was tension on this. Now I can easily remove them. Old one, new one. Old one is a ATF brand. Obviously that can't stand for automatic transmission fuel, but you can see it was starting to crack open here everywhere. Obviously it was leaking on both ends here, on both passages through the engine, and then here the cover in the back. All the stains you can see it was just time. I mean, the pump itself works fine, but the gaskets, I wonder if this got refurbished, just cleaned up with new gaskets, if it could still run another, I don't know, 100,000 kilometers, 100,000 miles, even more. Get a new one. GM branded. It's pretty much exactly the same. Well, it better be, except here there's an edge and here it's round, but that doesn't matter. The 4 bolts, I've already cleaned them up. I've cleaned them up here. Clean enough. This fits. There we go. And then here in the back, well, there's still some tape on here because I painted this with clear coat. Just put this aside. I want to make sure that the same bolts are going to the same places. So the funny thing is, there was a sticker saying that this is made in China, but then in the same package there was this bolt here for here, made in the United States, as well as a pair of gaskets. When it's, I should leave this open to bleed the system or just install it now, because there are applications where you actually need to connect the hose in here as well. So on the old one, the bolt sticks out about 1/2 centimeter, and this one has a 1/2 inch, probably a 1/2 inch. Is it a 1/2 inch? I'm not sure. Let's see. This is a 1/4 inch. No, it's way too small. It is 3/8. Here are the gaskets. So now the big question, do I put some RTV on it in between or not? Do I just let the gasket do its job? What I'm going to do is put some RTV, or I mean silicone gasket material. I'm not sure if I know the difference between gasket material, sealer. It's silicone based, and I'm just going to apply a little bit on the surface with my finger. Now I'm going to apply the same amount of sealant also on the mating surface on the car, on the engine. Everything is put back together. Water pump is tight. The lower hose is back on. Tighten the bracket on there as well. Cleaned up a little bit with just a wet towel. I don't like to have any coolant stains on the car. It's a bit sticky and it leaves a stain, so just clean everything with a wet towel. Now it's time to put the coolant back in. But I'm not going to start up the car now. I'm going to let it sit for a day or two, and meanwhile also change the power steering pump. And here we go. Everything is back in place. Look at this shiny new part. Shiny new water pump. Obviously you can see there's a bit of a, you can see the sealant, the RTV that I put additionally to the gasket on either side. I even put the belt back on, but and then just realized that I'm gonna have to take it off again because the next job is to tackle the power steering pump. So the belt will have to come off, then the pulley will have to come off with the steering wheel pulley puller I just purchased. But that is a story for another day. For today, this is enough. Anyhow, guys, KITT's making great progress. I'm really happy. I mean, it is taking some time, but at the same time, I'm doing a lot of different things. I'm doing a lot of things here. The springs, the steering rack, the water pump, the different oil leaks, the motor mounts, the water pump, just mentioned that, and now the power steering pump. Hopefully after that, KITT will really be sorted, and only thing I'm gonna have to do for the next years is just do the regular maintenance. But you know how it is with old cars, anything can happen at any time. So let's see, let's do this first, then go for a test drive. First step, take away the belt again. My 1/2-inch socket. The next step is to put catch can under the engine, under the power steering pump, so when I take it apart, I won't spill oil everywhere, or so whatever remaining oil is in the pump and in the lines will drip into the pan and not on the floor. Now let's open up the power steering reservoir cap and check for the actual level. It should be, this is hot, and here's is there a cold gauge? Yeah, there's a cold gauge down here. And it appears to be slightly above it. Now I'm using a pump to pump out as much of the oil as I can, inserting the tube. It's a hand pump. Basically the same pump I use for the coolant. Let's pump that out. You can see it's quite... I've changed it again already once, but you can see it's mixed with the remaining old fluid that was in there, probably from the factory. As you can see, it's not that much, but there will be more left in the lines. To pull the puller, I got this fancy pulley puller. Basically, you have this part here that you set up to the center of the pulley, and you have these sleeves. Basically, you wrap this around the edge of the pulley to hold us on to this puller. Put both sides on, and if I understand it correctly, you need to hold these sleeves together. You have this here from behind. Put this over it. So the pulley puller is connected tightly securely to the pulley, and then with 2 wrenches you can just pull it back, and there you go. The pin here will push against what's holding the pulley, and these sleeves will pull the pulley out apart from it. Simple as that. Let's go to it. .21mm and a 16. Obviously the pulley puller is right in the fan here. It's not optimal. Finally. The power steering pump here is connected to this frame where the alternator is connected to as well by a couple of T50 Torx T50 bolts. Before I remove the power steering pump, I'm gonna have to remove the lines, and let's take a look under the car to get a closer look at the lines. Here you can see that there's one line here which is connected with a which you can release with a 60mm wrench, and then the hose here, just gonna have to take a flathead screwdriver to undo the clamp. Or you can see Canada here. Anyone from Canada here, let me know in the comments. And then we can just release the lines. I have my bucket here just underneath. And here's the power steering pump and also the pulley. Let's have a look at the pulley first. Nothing special here. I'm going to clean this up. Then the power steering. This is where the lines were mounted to. So this is an 18mm. These two here, 18mm here and here. You have to undo this. And then this one here is a 1-inch, which equates roughly to 26mm. I don't have a 26mm wrench. I have 24 and then goes to 27. So I'm just gonna get my vice grip and try to loosen it that way. This side, this is where it was leaking. See, it's turning, and that's where it was leaking. So it's always good also to take a look at the new part. See, these are the bolts you're gonna undo, and hopefully the new seal here and everything will be clean. I mean, it will be tight. Yeah. So let's undo these 2 or 3 bolts. Yeah, I just took a 27 and drilled it out with the impact. Simple step. Now what you have to do is put these bolts back in, actually, well, ever so slightly. And use these wooden blocks just so that the pump, the actual pump, that only the housing is resting on the wooden blocks, and you can push and hammering on these 2 bolts, you'll press the pump out. See what this actually does is, with the bolts in here and here, we press against them, so we push the pump out so we can press it out of the housing, and then we can install the new pump after cleaning, of course. There you go. Bolts still intact. Ooh, shit. Well, a little bit too ambitious here. Housing is clean, the dipstick with the lid is clean. Just gonna clean the inside of the new power steering pump a little bit. And you can clearly see here there's a magnet. It's just on here, and it's on the old one as well, and it's frankly quite full of metal shavings, should I say. Well, we'll have a look at the old one once this is in. Here I'll have to undo this nut as well. However, this time I'm going to be careful with the spring. Let's install it. Pre-assemble this. These bolts here, I'm going to clean these as well. Now by tightening them gently, they should pop back in place. Try to tighten this somewhat evenly. Loosening this a little bit again, trying to tap it in there from the side, but the mallet. Simply use a vise as well, and clamp it in with it. As you can see, it's going in nicely here where the bolts are. There, on here, and on this side. But here it's still sticking out a bit, and I don't want it to get uneven and to block. So I'm just going to get a vise. Instead of just hammering it in, just gently going to apply the force of the vise. Is this it? Looks like it. Good tight. Another squeeze. Oh, that's it. Time to put it back in. Okay, I've reinstalled everything, the lines, cleaned it up with some brake clean, wiped it off. Now we're gonna put the pulley back on, and this, similar to when I pull it off, needs this pusher. Now we had the puller before, now we have the pusher. So you put the pulley on as much as you can, and then you just bolt in the bolt, and then you take another wrench to counter hold to actually press the whole pulley back in. So this is going to go in now, right here. Bolt is going on into our steering pump shaft. No, still not. There we go. Now, you need to get the exact wrench. One to hold the bolt, one to press in the pulley. Dexron 3. Basically the transmission oil that I used on this car. You could use power steering fluid, but and in these power steering pumps, transmission ATF is fine. Measure out the gauge. Obviously we'll have to get lead, but for now, just want to see if it reads anything. Barely. Obviously, as always, I'm leaving all the details in the description. The Dexron 3 for GM cars. Measure again the cold level. There's a cold gauge and a hot gauge. Obviously now we're going to measure the cold gauge, bone dry. Dripping alarm. Alright guys, it's actually the next day and you can see all these oil here. This is what actually dripped out of the power steering pump reservoir. And luckily enough, I was able to just catch most of it, just a little bit that I had to soak up. And since this is a clean recipient, I just let it drip in here overnight. Let me show you what went wrong. So what went wrong is that fitting here, the big one. It wasn't tight, or it still isn't tight. So either I didn't tighten it down properly, and you can see the line here. I already loosened that again because I have to tighten this properly. Okay, I took the new one out, and the sealant is in the rubber. Probably just didn't seal it right, and I couldn't really get in there with the impact, obviously, once it's installed. And now I bought an adjustable wrench. Don't know how you would call that one, but with this I should be able to tighten it properly in there. Okie dokie guys, I've tightened all those bolts down, cleaned it up with some brake clean. The good news is that what caused the leak in the beginning here on the old pump, the seal of the pump itself seems to be tight. There was no leak here up front. Hopefully now the fitting here is tight as well. Look guys, it didn't quite work, so I've decided to go with the tape route here. Teflon tape, I think this is. Just to put around the edge, because the sealant here is obviously sealing the inside of the pump. This being the old pump. And but then to seal the housing here, I've just decided to apply this. That's why I also went around the entire nut here, because it needs to seal here on the edge where the housing is, where it's touching the housing. Let's see, I'm probably going to put some sealant also on the other line that goes inside the fitting, that one there, even though that's been tight so far. Alright guys, so the Teflon appears to have done the trick. Really, I put some Teflon also here on the line of the thread on the line, and not just on the fitting that goes into the housing, but the Teflon here really does do the sealing between the fitting and the housing itself. I haven't started it up yet, but I filled it up. Like with the initial fill up, we'll have to bleed the system. So far it seems to be tight, and the power steering pump seal as well is doing its job, so hopefully this will all stay like this. Maybe just gonna hose this down one more time with some brake clean, and we're done.
After that, I let the car cool down and checked the power steering fluid level as well as the coolant level, and generally made sure that there were no more leaks. Then it was time for a test drive.
Alright guys, let's do this. First test drive after I've done all the work you've just seen. So let's go for it. Was the shim for the spring compressor that was obviously still stuck in the control arm. Luckily I got it out now. Suspension feels good so far. Steering as well. But the alignment is definitely a little bit off. See how I have to kind of keep the wheel ever so slightly to the right so the car drives straight. Definitely have to adjust that a little bit. I mean, they changed the spark controller, but the old one was in good shape. It was just preventative maintenance. The new one seems to be working fine as well. And there was also a knocking noise when I would exit the roundabouts. That seems to have disappeared as well, which is pretty good. It's just the alignment. You can see, like, I'm always, when I want to go straight, I have to keep the steering slightly to the right. I mean, it was like this before a little bit, but now it's somewhat way off. But apart from that, the steering seems to be precise. You know? Definitely not as much play anymore as there was before. Not that it is super precise, but it's just the way these cars are built. I mean, the proper way to go about this would be to bring the car to an alignment shop and they would do the alignment. And I might do that down the line, but for now, I will just straighten up the direction myself. And then let's see. Also, I'm always worry about who I'm actually trusting this car, since I've done so much and most of it myself and all the mechanics. And I don't want anyone or any mechanic or any workshop to be working on my car.
I am Lanite Industries 2000. My serial number is Alpha Delta 227529. I am unauthorized to allow access to my central processing unit.
A couple of days later, after I figured out the alignment, we went out for another test drive, but this time on the motorway, on the freeway, to test whether the previous vibrations were still there or if the motor mounts and transmission mount change had cancelled those vibrations.
I'm doing 120 kilometers an hour now, the speed limit here in the motorway, freeway, and it's very smooth, I have to say. Yes, there is a little bit of shaking, but it's also due to the design of having a fixed rear axle. You can't expect it to be as smooth as in a car that has independent suspension in all four corners. There used to be this very heavy shaking in the steering column and the steering, and then they would kind of translate it to the whole car. But now that the transmission mount and the two motor mounts are changed, I can see that it's really taking all these vibrations really easily, and new rubber just does the job. Success! It's just so nice to be cruising KITT on a summer day like this. Nice roads, nice landscape. KITT's been put back together. Everything works. The AC is blowing ice cold on a hot day. I can put the sunshades in. I can take the T-top off if I want to. Steering is fine. It's very good. The suspension is much comfortable than it was before. Everything just works. It's just now a really reliable car, other than just being, you know, my dream car that I got to get and restore. It is now a really reliable Sunday car that I can basically also drive daily if I wanted. I mean, it has now 136,100 kilometers, which is nothing. I'm never gonna, if I can. I mean, sometimes you say, oh, you're never gonna sell it. I said I would never sell the RCZ, and then I did. But KITT is something different. KITT is something, this Trans Am, that ignited my passion for cars. So I'm never gonna sell this car if I really don't have to. Alright guys, here we are. I've tested everything, there's no leaks, everything is working properly. You saw it on the motorway also, the car is driving fine. I've adjusted the steering a little bit so that the steering wheel is now straight when I'm driving, when the car is driving straight. So all is well. So thank you very much for following me on this adventure. This is episode 24, was supposed to be the final upgrades and the final repair video I made on this car, but now this happened and here we are. Anyhow, this is where I'm ending it with the repair videos and the upgrade videos on my KITT Trans Am, on this car. I've had a blast doing it, and obviously I'm going to continue to enjoy KITT now as much as I can. But as far as YouTube videos are concerned, for repair videos, modifications, I'm going to end it here. Stay tuned for what's coming next. This doesn't mean that KITT won't be seen on this channel anymore in the future. I've always had in the back of my mind a sort of video where I'm shutting up, I'm not saying anything, I'm just filming the V8 sound and some driving impressions. Wanted to bring the drone a bit more intensively. But me living in Switzerland and space, or free open space, we don't really film anything else than just whatever you want to film, your car and some nature, is difficult, and the laws are very stringent. So it's not easy just to go out and film and follow the car and put maybe my California night plate on the back and film the car and just make that happen. If you know a place where I could film with a drone freely on the road, where I wouldn't really impact anyone else's life, either in Switzerland or in the surrounding areas in Germany, Austria or France, hit me up, send me an email, a comment here in the video, email, or also on Instagram, and I'd be happy to get back to you. Thank you. Anyhow guys, thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.
Say no more, Michael. There's someone approaching us, Michael. Can we go for a ride soon? Wonderful. That makes me very happy.